Hey everyone, it's Christopher Swan, and welcome to this week's episode of Living Your Journey, a podcast where I chat with folks that have figured it out, their passions, career paths, their focus, kind of like following their North Star. Their story may change, but that's what it's about, understanding that you're on your journey every day. Additional information about each episode, guest, and other shows can be found at accidentalinformation.com. Okay, so this week, Tony Tharae joins me to talk about his creative life. He's a filmmaker, but in his words, a storyteller, and we definitely touch on why he says this in the show. To me, he's a creative powerhouse. That's because he more than dabbles in all sorts of media. Film, illustration, branding, art direction, you name it, he can do it. In the episode, Tony and I discuss his journey of following film in storytelling, including taking the leap from a steady brand job to focusing in his independent creative ventures. We also get into his recent and current projects, a graphic novel, then to his sci-fi show Rift that will soon be a trailer to realize it and pitch it as a new series. I really like this conversation because it just seems so honest. He's doing what he loves, pursuing his passion, but he's also making it work in his time. As a single father and prioritizing his time, it's just real. Also, we kind of geek out as we talk about the independent entertainment world and science fiction. Sorry about that. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, well, welcome to the show, Tony. I am actually super excited to talk to you and hear everything about your filmmaking world because we were talking earlier. It's been forever since we've really caught up. And I know that you've been working on some great stuff because I, of course, have researched the heck out of you and I can see stuff that you post. So anyways, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. I'm glad. It's interesting. I've been, talking to different friends and just folks I've come across on, my path as well. And it's interesting because I mentioned this because of you and kind of your background is I know like the most fascinating people. This exercise has been like just creating this podcast, it brought me to all these folks. I'm like, gosh, I know these are cool people. And so when I reached out to you, I was like, well, you're kind of this creative guru, but not only that, but you're really striving on things that you love. And so I'm just really excited that you're here to be able to share kind of what that looks like for you.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for that setup. I hope I can live up to that setup.
Pressure. Wait. Well, why did the podcast end early? I don't know. So I'm just going to give a little intro, just to kind of round it out. So right now and you tell me if I'm wrong about this, but you're a director, a filmmaker. I know you're working on this project as well, a film. And there's, I think, some more stuff going on there too that I want to get into. But of course, like I said earlier, I know you as a powerhouse creative guy, kind of in this whole all media space. So that's right. Would you consider that true about you? You just kind of live in all those creative media spaces.
Yeah. And, and the thing is, I think what's kind of interesting actually about what I do, everybody that I know of that's involved in filmmaking or in media somehow, whether they're illustrators or writers or even traditional filmmakers, it's a long time between the time you decide that that's what you're going to be and the time at which that career pays for itself. And so ideally you find something that you can do as your sort of day job that doesn't intrude on the your actual creative pursuit, the passion that you have for the work that you're doing. And in my case in particular, I started out as an art director, and I think the great thing about that, at least for me personally, is that being an art director has given me the opportunity to work on a lot of things that in many ways I think actually serve my greater goal of being a filmmaker. So whether it's that, I've had to handle large scale projects for clients, whether it's a corporate initiative or, even something that's more directly related, like an industrial video or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Those are things that they help the larger goal. And in a way, I mean, I kind of categorize myself as a filmmaker, but in a sense, like I think I'm kind of more generally in the storyteller category. And the main reason I say that actually is just because one of the things that I'm working on right now, in addition to some of the film and television kinds of things that I'm trying to develop, is a graphic novel. And, and certainly that kind of falls into a different side of the thing, but it's still storytelling. And I think that's kind of been at the center of everything that I've pursued for the things that actually are creatively gratifying.
That is so great. And I love that you say all that, because everything you just said resonated for me as well, especially when you got down to like storyteller. Because like when you summarize all these things, and I think that you're doing that, you can craft in different mediums. You could do it as a graphic novel, a movie, something for a brand or whatever. But really what it comes down to is you're telling this great story. And that's what stitches it together, really.
Right.
Versus saying, I only do film. If I were to go the other route where I was like, yeah, well, I'm only going to do podcasts, that feels limiting. And that's so funny, because that's storyteller is kind of how I refer to myself, storyteller, creator, because I think it allows to do so much.
Right. Well, and, it's interesting because I was just listening to, the Hollywood Reporter repeatedly does these round tables. Particularly around, award season. And they had done a round table including Quentin Tarantino and some of the, guys that like Danny Boyle that were, in the spotlight this year. And Quentin had made a comment some years back, actually, I think, about how he kind of felt like filmmaking was a young man's game. And that he thought that, most of the people that he really admired had, and I'm paraphrasing him here. I'm probably getting some of this wrong, but
this isn't from verbatim by memory. What?
Exactly. But, he said something to the effect of, he thought that a lot of the filmmakers that he really admired had done their best films when they were younger men. And, and at the time when I first heard that, I thought to myself, like, well, what do you, I mean, especially as somebody that had kind of started their effectively quote unquote film career later in life, I thought, oh, well, it's kind of a disheartening comment to make.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he, then at this roundtable just this last year, he was talking about After the Hateful Eight and what he was looking forward to on the horizon. And I think they asked him that very question about what's next after filmmaking, if he is indeed going to leave that behind. And he said that he was interested in doing a play. And what I realized at that moment was that I had attached too much significance to his comment about filmmaking specifically being a young man's game. It wasn't that he wanted to stop being a storyteller in any way. He just wanted to change from one medium to another. So, and the way that he saw it, there were particular stories that he thought he would be really interested in figuring out or learning how to tell as a stage play. And that, I think, was really bolstering for me, because that idea that really at the core of it, what we do is we just look for different ways to tell a story. And, especially these days when we're looking at a new media landscape where people are saying, well, wait a second, you have 15 seconds on Instagram. Is that even something that you can use to tell a story? And, it becomes an interesting kind of challenge. People's attentions are shorter. What can you do in that kind of timing? And even what I was just actually listening to reading a great article about how Louis C.K., how, he oftentimes in his show, which has been really great for him on FX, will do a story that stretches one episode or an arc over 6, and that nothing about the limitations of the media have defined for him this kind of story he's going to tell. It may be a comedy, it may be a drama. It doesn't really matter. He tells the story he wants to tell, and I think we're unique in this, in our ability to be able to say we're just storytellers and then choose our medium.
Absolutely. I think this is such a great time for that.
Yeah.
You flash back 20 years ago, it wasn't quite like that. We didn't have these channels and mediums. I also think that has led to different, because there are different avenues that people have jumped in because they adapt to something better or easier or feel closer to that channel, or medium,
Right.
So like think of like podcasts, like, well, it's for me, it's like a glorified radio show sort of, I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's because it's done differently and because we can do them independently and as a hobby or whatever, like now more people are doing them. So I love that it's, just kind of help people be more creative and for the creative folks to also stretch their limit and also not limit ourselves. That's so much fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what's also great about it is just that, when you look at maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago in, whether it's filmmaking or television, there was a very prescribed path about what you needed to create.
Yeah.
And in order to even get in that field, to be on the same playing field as that. And now, you see people that do something immensely creative, and it doesn't matter if it's a minute or if it's 6 minutes, and they're on YouTube and suddenly they're getting attention.
Yeah.
And they're not getting attention just from fans who have more of a voice than they ever did before, but they're also getting attention from studios and from, people that actually have the capability of greenlighting projects, which is amazing. It's a landscape that I don't think we've ever had access to before.
It's so funny you even kind of like dived into this whole conversation. I have been listening to this new podcast by Brandon Harvey called Sounds Good, and it just came out. I think he started in February. I think that's when it did. So, I mean, he's this young guy that everybody seems to know on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been a photographer. And actually, it's so funny because he just had this whole, I'm really a storyteller. Photography just felt like it was so limiting. And because really when I wanted to do it, I wanted to tell stories. So I've been fascinated in this. It's interesting because his podcast is similar-ish to mine.
Right.
He's not talking about journeys, but he's talking about just people doing really great positive things in the world and really happy people on the internet. I found him really fascinating. But it's interesting. He talks about this whole thing as well. And I was like, totally, like you get it. And so it's so funny that we're talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's interesting actually, because these days, it's funny. There's a musician that I kind of follow. She's really interesting, actually. I think her name is Kavehi. And she's part of the do-it-yourself movement. She basically does things that are a little like Reggie Watts, where she kind of takes music and she's just a solo artist, but she uses computers, and while she's singing, she's remixing herself and making a track, and it's interesting because she has kind of built this movement around herself. She plays in live venues as often as she can. She tours around. She just was in LA recently, and then I found out just recently she was actually featured in an Intel commercial. Really? Because she uses Intel based machines in her computer setup, and little things like that. It's this ability to find your audience, and there are 7 billion people to choose from, so even a small audience is notable.
Absolutely. That totally reminds me of Flula. You're familiar? Are you familiar with him?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So when he said that, I was like, that reminds me of Flula, because, I've followed him forever because I'm like, he's just crazy. And he's talented and crazy, and then he ends up in Pitch Perfect 2, and I'm like, what the what?
Exactly.
And I'm like, wow, I love the Germans. That's what I loved watching that. But it is fascinating to do that. So, okay, I could talk about this forever because it's totally my world, but I love to transition into talking about kind of your current. I know we'll unpack like your background because I definitely want people to hear more about kind of how you moved into where you're at today and all these elements that have made you in this creative world. Because I especially have met you when you were more in the, the brand space.
Right.
Tell me about today. Tell me about the graphic novel and then the film. And is the film Rift?
Well, Rift is actually meant to be more of a series.
Oh, okay.
And I think the elements that you actually saw of Rift that are online are basically that project was really interesting, in particular because I had been writing Rift for a while as kind of a Lost style series.
Oh, yeah.
And, and the clips that you saw that are online right now on Vimeo and YouTube are actually pre-visualization clips that I'd done. So
yeah.
A couple of friends of mine had at one point, they knew I had been working on a number of things, but they were anxious to see some of it.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had kind of issued the challenge to me of, like, okay, start posting some of this stuff.
Sure.
And so what I was posting was each one of those clips. And, I think one of the challenges for me is just that, when it comes to posting work, I think there's this challenge that, you ideally, like, you're thinking to yourself, well, wait, what if this is the only thing someone sees that I did?
Yeah.
Is it perfect? Is it right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so that was one of the challenges I had in trying to put some of the stuff up, because every one of those pre-visualization clips you saw was done in one day.
Mm-hmm.
So each clip, I gave myself one day for each clip. And, and you don't know, you post these things and you think to yourself, like, well, what if people think that this is the best I can do,
Oh, sure.
And so I added on the pre-visualization component to each of them, just to say, like, wait,
Tony.
guys. This is just pre-visualization. This is just a draft.
You got to let some of that go, my friend. Like,
I know.
It's something I learned in the Valley, like there's always a version 1.1 afterwards. Like there's always something coming. But okay, cool. And I knew they were not final pieces for sure. I just was like, it gave me a really good flavor. So,
oh, great. Well, that's great.
Well, then tell me more about then current projects or kind of your world and these other projects that I probably have seen sprinkled around.
Yeah, of course. And so the Rift is meant to be more of a series. And, certainly now as the landscape has opened up because of all of these digital first networks that are doing great, like Amazon and Hulu and Netflix, the idea is to take Rift in that direction, where it would be a continuing ongoing series. And, it's set in near future Los Angeles, kind of San Angeles kind of based story. I thought it would be kind of a cool project to work on, and kind of touches on some of my creative influences, like, some of the cyberpunk William Gibson novels.
Absolutely.
Which were so pivotal in some of the early work that I had read, and, kind of informed a lot of the storytelling that I had wanted to do. And, I'd waited for so many years for things like Neuromancer or Adoru, some of my favorite William Gibson works, to come out on film. And it just, we got Johnny Mnemonic with, Keanu Reeves, and that was about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see the influence totally when I saw those clips. I can absolutely see.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah. And Rift is kind of my answer to that kind of a story. Definitely a William Gibson sort of Blade Runner influenced story. And, and given the right opportunity, I would love to kind of take that to the next level and, and turn it into a full-fledged Lost style, really immersive kind of a story that people wanted to follow along with. And then alongside that is actually the graphic novel project. And the graphic novel project, I think, necessarily one of the reasons why it's a graphic novel is because of the fact that it's a much bigger story. It's sort of a pre-apocalyptic story about literally the end of the world, the end of the earth. The sun is about to literally envelop the earth and destroy everything. So it's the end of the human race as we know it. And we're following the particular story of a couple of the people that were kind of left behind from the Exodus missions to effectively just to stay on earth as it's consumed. And so it's the kind of story that, I could see it easily on the small side being like Danny Boyle's Sunshine movie, which was just enormous,
Absolutely.
And so it's not the kind of thing that out of the gate anyone gets the kind of budget to do.
Right.
But as a graphic novel, and certainly a medium that I've always been very attached to, because I've been a comic book collector since, way back. So, the chance to do it as a graphic novel is kind of cool, because it gives me a chance to kind of explore that illustrative side of, my creative brain that lets me sit and, and effectively storyboard out the movie,
right,
while also really working out the story, which has been, a fantastic, again, like I was saying to you before, you try and find things that actually work in a constructive way towards each other, that constructively interfere with each other, so that everything that you do individually is actually kind of pushing along the larger goal. And in that way, I think the graphic novel was kind of perfect.
Absolutely. Tell me if I have this wrong. Is that the ninth minute?
Yes, the ninth
Yeah,
minute. Yes.
ninth minute. Okay. For a while, I've seen you post something here and there, and I'm like, what are these illustrations you're posting? Because they are awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And I didn't have a connection to it at all until I started to, hunt it down a little bit. And I was like, okay. But I couldn't quite grasp it. I didn't know it was a graphic novel, but now makes complete sense. Because at first I thought, wait, are you illustrating? Are you in animation now? How do I not know these things? That is so cool. So is that really then your current project and kind of you're really dived into that? Or are you also juggling, a few things here and there as well for like creatively for yourself?
Yeah, I think the Rift and the ninth minute are actually the two highest priorities in terms of my creative space.
Okay.
And certainly it's funny because I was actually talking to a really good friend of mine who has actually been a huge creative influence as well. She's also a strategist and an information architect, but she's also a really fantastic writer and poet and screenwriter.
Really?
And we were chatting about this idea of this, I guess on the negative side, you could call it a graveyard, but of the sense of this field of projects that you inevitable, I think, when you're in this kind of a field, like ideas occur to you and you have these things that are constantly in a state of development somewhere in the back of your head,
Yeah.
So behind Rift and the ninth minute are probably about a dozen different other ideas for films and graphic novels that are kind of gestating, and periodically when my attention is when I'm kind of burned out on something, will like shift over to those, and I can it gives me a place to kind of still be creative and pursue the bigger goal, but work on one of those background projects.
I think that's actually so smart, though, because even I've been doing something like that in the last few months as I've built out this podcast and the brand behind it. And there's a parent company that this belongs to. And because the podcast is just it's the first show of the different shows that I'm going to launch. And I had to tell you after a while, I was like, okay, I don't want to talk about this podcast anymore. Let me go work on this other thing for a little bit, because it just gave me that. I was still being creative in both spaces, but it allowed me to like pause for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I come back and I was like, okay, let me go get this, like the logo done now for the podcast and whatever I'm going to do. And I felt a lot more energized. So that's super smart. Think going back over to like, I don't want to lose traction of the ninth minute. Do you have, not that I'm trying to nail you down for a date or anything, but I'm purely curious, like, do you kind of have like, hey, I want to get this kind of wrapped up by some point so we can, the reason I say something like that is there a time in the future that we can look forward to seeing it?
Yeah, well, and the thing is, what I'm hoping to do is this summer, I really want to get a much cleaner visualization of what this series could look like.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I think that, it's interesting because there are so many different channels now to pursue for, the development of shows than there ever were before. But I think one of the challenges of that also is that there are a lot of people flooding out of the woodwork, to get their show posted. So, and to get their show the attention of these networks. And I think the challenge is just making sure that when you do come forward with your offering, that you feel completely secure that maybe there's no way to feel completely secure, but to feel like you've put forth a really solid effort in saying, I think this is going to be really compelling.
Yeah.
And for me, I think what's really important is that I don't want it to just be compelling from a storytelling standpoint. I want it to be visually compelling. I want it to be, in terms of the performances and the talent that's attached to it. I want it to be compelling in so many different ways that, I think it's mostly a matter of kind of getting to the point where I've got this thing where I can say, even if it's just a fully realized trailer, to say, this is what this series promises. And my goal is this summer. I'm art directing at the moment. I'm actually art directing a human rights conference in Oslo, Norway, called the Oslo Freedom Forum. And that event actually is on May 23rd. So immediately following that event is when I'll shift my attention fully back to pushing this Rift trailer forward so that I can get it out there and start to see where we can take it.
I love that you just threw in that, oh, and by the way, here's this other thing I'm doing, which I know is not, I would imagine that's not you're obviously can be creative. You can do all these great things with that project as well, but that's not your project per se.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I love that you are still doing really cool things, though, no matter what space you're in, because being the art director in there, I know that you're being the creative storyteller. Obviously, you're bringing that to life for them. So, I mean, that's actually cool, and it's good that you have it also an end date for that, because then you can jump back into the I'm going to say the stuff that you love, but I think you love kind of everything that you do. But I think for us that would love to see some of the stuff too, it'd be really cool for you to, like, I can't wait for you to go over to that part too, to say, yeah, how do you visualize this?
Right.
Because it's really, like you said, it's a storyboard, really, almost. It's a graphic novel, but it could be so much more.
Absolutely.
So exciting.
It's interesting, actually, because I think that that's one of the things that is really exciting about that project in particular, about the Rift project. And, I was going to touch on this a little bit later about, creative challenges when we're talking about creative challenges. But, I think that there's everyone that I know of that's doing anything really creative kind of hits those low points where they say to themselves, like, oh, like, am I really saying anything new here? Am I really saying anything interesting? Or maybe they're even staring at a blank page and they're saying, like, I don't have a story today. I don't have words to add to this today. And, I think that what's interesting, though, is that for as many days as that happens, there are also those days where you look at something you've done and you're excited for the prospect of what could be on the horizon. And I think that was the thing that was most interesting for me about the Rift series, is just that, I played with a lot of ideas and I thought about a lot of concepts behind what was really driving the story forward. But it was that moment when I kind of sat back and looked at it and said, wait a second, this is something that I might want to watch. And that was huge for me, for that moment of being able to say, I'm excited to see where this goes, even if I'm not sure where that is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. I heard this yesterday, 2 days ago, and it's so bad. I shouldn't do this. I'm going to quote somebody that quoted somebody else. It was, but I think actually the person I was listening to was talking about Ira Glass, who had said something about, like, the golden rule of entertainment is don't produce anything you don't want to watch yourself or see yourself.
Right.
And it was about follow the stuff that you love to do. And because it's funny when you said do I have anything new to say? Has it all been said before? But if you just, it's that focus on the prospect of it's something that you want to try or excited about. And if you want to see it,
right.
I think that's like, the thing that we've been hearing for years now about being authentic and being yourself and being true. I think that's actually part of what that relates to that. If you can be really authentic by just doing the stuff that you love, other people will love that because they can feel it, see it, and you are bringing good ideas to life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, like, I think that, I think this is one of the great things about the way things are now, in this new media landscape, is just that, more and more we see these things like where, hey, there's a huge number of people that watched Firefly,
right?
Even though the network canceled it, there are a lot of people that watched it and they continue to write fan fiction and, and kind of stay behind it. And you realize that for everything that you kind of really put your creative heart into, there's an audience out there. There is an audience that will connect to it, and and it's just a matter of getting it out there for them to find.
So true. So I think Firefly is a great example, even though it was still main media, out there. But yeah, brown coats still live on. I still receive emails about that.
Absolutely.
Because it's clearly something I watch on a regular basis, but I can't tell you how many times I can, repeat the lines.
Having named my daughter after River Tam, that was an easy sell. So
right? Because I know you understand. That's awesome. Hey, well, I'd love to transition back a little bit now,
Yeah, of course.
Because I want to go back in time, the time before I knew you, all the way through. And the thing I'm really speaking about too is I want to know a little bit more about the non-film space too that, I know that I think you co-founded Media Org, and I think this was back in New York. And then also the stint I, of course, really know is when I met you at Baker Brands and, when we met when I was in corporate and stuff. So I'd love to kind of jump back a little bit and say, so help me understand about your journey from Mr. Creative Guy working in brand and art and all these different elements and where you came from there up to here.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I started out in New York. I started out in New York after I'd left art school. I did a very short stint working at a museum, doing some painting and doing some design, in Western New York, and then moved to New York, and of course everything changed.
Yeah.
New York was great because I think this was, and particularly for me, coming there for the first time. You realize that no one thinks that any goal is too large. It doesn't matter if you're having lunch next to the person that wants to be the next, Diane von Furstenberg, or,
Right.
or somebody that's starting an enormous web startup. Like everyone's got a big dream or a big idea. And so you immediately kind of start to think, oh, well, great. It's all possible, So New York was great. I linked up with a couple of friends of mine. I started a design firm, and we were doing fantastic work, and we were really successful pretty much until September 11th. And when September 11th happened, work evaporated. It really kind of, with the firm folded up. And at that point, my partners and I were kind of forced to think, okay, well, what are we going to do next? Where did we want to go from here? And at that point, my attention kind of turned back to, pushing filmmaking back up to the forefront. And I think the challenge was that at that time, it was just that, I still had to work. I still had to have a full-time job. And so being an art director was something that I could continue to pursue so that at the very least that track didn't languish. So I continued to pursue art direction, and I actually ended up coming out to Los Angeles because I thought that at the very least here in Los Angeles, even if I was doing art direction, I would be adjacent to Hollywood,
right,
and thereby start to build connections and get myself familiar with the industry at the very least. And that kind of took me to, I bounced around a bit, in doing art direction, and eventually kind of got to the point where I actually just started to consult independently, where, which was great because I've been very fortunate over the course of the last 10 or 15 years to, have gotten lots of referrals and recommendations, which have kind of driven all of the creative work I've done over the course of the last 15 years or so.
So I want to touch back because I don't want to lose this thought when after the design firm, that was Satori, right? The one in New York? Okay.
Yes, Satori,
so
exactly.
After you guys folded that and, you started to think more about this film part too, was that something that called you before starting that? Like, where did that film part come in for you?
Well, it's interesting because the film part has been there for such a long time. I think the challenge for me is just that I think it started as early as probably Star Wars. I was a kid growing up in Western New York, and when I saw Star Wars, this idea of this small town kid on Tatooine, who dreamed of the outside world, a bigger universe, was so resonant, and I was completely taken away with that and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which kind of blew me away.
Same here, actually.
Such a great movie. Actually, even watching it now, such a great movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
But won't do it justice, but there's a fantastic quotation by Roger Ebert about something about film as being an engine for empathy, something to that effect. But what I loved about that quotation is that films like that actually did reach right out and grab me. And, from that moment forward, all I could think about was doing something like that. I think the challenge is just that, in that earlier life, there's a kind of a impression I think that everyone has that if you don't know someone, you'll never do it. If Hollywood is a closed, it's a closed set, and there are only people there, only if you have an invitation can you possibly get in. And who knows, that may have been true 30 years ago. It may have been true 20 years ago, but I don't think it's true anymore.
No, absolutely.
And and it took that many years of, I guess, this journey to kind of get to the point where you kind of say to yourself, no, you can make your own invitation now.
Absolutely. I love that. Just because that's where I'm at. That's my story. Maybe a little bit different, except for the two movies. Absolutely. I was like, wait, I'm Luke. That's why I liked Luke. Growing up I grew up in a great area in the wine country, but when you're a child, you don't think of it as the wine country. It's
absolutely.
I was like, wait, this is the country I wanted to be in Hollywood.
Right.
Yeah. So absolutely, that makes sense. So then, okay, we jump forward. You're into design because obviously that's using your creative powers, and you're feeling good about all that stuff. But was that the beginning then, like when you were like, oh, film, maybe that's like the storytelling coming back, and then coming to LA was like, hey, get a little bit more into it. And then I know you said you bounced around a little bit too, but so you were at Baker Brands for a while, and we met. So just so the folks know that we met, I don't know if you remember this, we actually met when I was at Avery Dennison.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know that you guys were doing work when we were all at Disney. I say we all because, right, half the department.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's funny because you guys were working there, and actually was like down the hall from Heather Rim that you guys were working with. So I was like, it's funny because you were part of my story even before I even knew you were part of my story. That's why I kind of look at it. I was like, I feel like I've known Tony even longer.
Right.
Yeah. So it's funny because I look back at even when we would say this when you guys weren't around. I was like, Tony makes me look amazing. Because you knew. I love the stuff that you guys were coming up with, and
oh well, thank you.
And I was like, and you were always like trying to push the envelope more than we could probably do, even though that's what I wanted to do. So just so folks know, like we met during that time, and you were doing some really great work there. Okay, so from there, I love that I'm narrating your story now.
You're doing a great job, though.
Right,
so.
Right. I'll just throw in all these accolades. So, and I think it was like 2008 is when you left Baker, and that was your, hey, I am going to go, like I'm all in now. I'm going to go try this film thing or this storytelling and figure out what that's about. Is that true? And if so, or if not, correct me. And then has that just been like rift? And I know that you actually had a short film too you worked on that was what, 2081?
Yes, exactly. Wow. Yeah.
That's from memory.
And in fact, that was actually something that I was working on while I took a brief hiatus while I was at Baker.
Okay.
To work on that. And a good friend of mine from New York, one of my former partners actually in the design firm, was doing a film adaptation of a short story by Kurt Vonnegut. Mm-hmm. And the story was actually Harrison Bergeron, which he retitled 2081 for the purposes of the short film. But, we had we worked on that for 2 years in pre-production, and then finally kind of put everything together, and I did the production design and visual effects for the film. So it was a lot of work, especially because we were independent.
Mm-hmm.
So we were literally setting up a machine shop in the middle of an apartment in West Hollywood so that we could manufacture props for this.
That's crazy.
But it was such a fantastic experience, and we were working, burning the midnight oil. And I had a new baby at the time. I had, my daughter had just been born a year earlier. And so I was, wrestling, trying to, take care of her and manage my freelance and also, work on this film. But at the same time, it was such a gratifying experience. I think it's one of the things that's great about that kind of an experience is that it very much it's a litmus test, because as exhausted as I was by the time we had wrapped filming on that, I looked at my friend Chandler and I said, I literally want to do it again. I had strep throat, I was exhausted and I was like, wow, we really have to do that again. That was fantastic, And but the thing is that, but I was still at Baker after that. And then I think shortly after that was when I think we actually had met. But I think it was actually there was a point that came while I was at Baker where I kind of started to think about some of these other goals, the stories that I was writing, the films that I was thinking of working on, and seeing those timelines getting pushed off.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, you kind of look at those things and you say to yourself, like, how much further is it going to get pushed? How am I going to continue to prioritize other things over these things that I really want to do? And, and I mean, it's a first world problem, because we're talking about things that like, oh, I want to be creative, I want to write my own stories and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the alternative is, like a successful career as an art director. So, boo-hoo for me, but at the same time, there is something to be said for serving your creative self and your creative vision, because that's the stuff that kind of makes you get up in the morning and makes you excited to to create things and to do things. And I think it's important in that way. And I woke up at one point and my daughter was getting older, and and I was kind of looking at her developing very quickly. And I think having a child, one of the things that's interesting about it is that I think it becomes this very visible ticking clock, because you have this kid that's growing so quickly right in front of you.
Yeah.
And you're suddenly aware of how fast everything's moving. And, and I think I was thinking about her, and I was thinking about my parents, and I was thinking about how many things my parents, at later in life had kind of gotten to the point where they had things that they had planned to do, and then they had kind of pushed them aside for one reason or another.
Right.
And I was looking at my daughter and I was thinking about that and thinking to myself, how are you going to be that person too? That says, I wanted to do all of these things, but I was busy, but I didn't get around to it. And I think that was when I kind of said to myself, like, okay, time to reprioritize your work a little bit, and certainly to be responsible and continue to do the work that I've been doing as a creative director and an art director, but also to make sure that I give equal attention to my own work so that I feel like I've given it the effort that it deserves.
Absolutely. I love that you have River's not only your daughter, but a countdown clock.
Absolutely.
It's really true. I've heard that from friends before where, as they become parents, it's the realization that there's a definitive timeline to life,
right?
And that it's not we're 19 and we have the world and we're invincible, we can do anything we want, where
right,
those are all wonderful things, and I definitely think people should feel that way. But you're right. It's what else are you going to do? I'm curious about, like, because you talked about, your folks, like that was a great way to flash back and say, yeah, so this is, where they were at, and do I want to do it differently? Or what a great reminder for me to do it differently. Do you think there's especially for like people that don't have kids or people that are maybe struggling with trying to figure out like, oh, so when should I do it? Or when should I be all in? Because, I think a lot of people have this fear of, especially folks that have maybe more seasoned in their career. When you have a mortgage and you have a kid, you have a hard time jumping in maybe somewhere else.
Right.
Any kind of advice to anybody that is, vacillating a little bit or not sure what to do next?
Yeah. And, one of the things that I think is most interesting about that, because I was going to say there is a flip side to the kid part of it. And that is that as much as I was kind of thinking to myself, like, I have this ticking clock and I need to kind of move ahead. One of the other things that I also think I also became acutely aware of after having a kid was that it was the larger idea of the kind of schedules we give ourselves. I was listening to a report on NPR that when they were talking about the invention of retirement, when there were, before retirement, there were people that stayed in their jobs until they literally couldn't move anymore, and along came the baby boomers and other people that needed jobs. And so, suddenly there was, hey guys, why don't you retire? There's this great future waiting for you on golf courses and, in Hawaii.
Hawaii. I was like, isn't it Florida? Isn't that where everybody goes?
Right, exactly. And, but it was a way to kind of incent people to leave their jobs at a certain age so that those jobs were then available to other people. And, I think that, one of the things I became acutely aware of after my daughter had come along was that, everyone had their schedule, their clock, that, it was, oh, by this time I've got to have a child. By this time I've got to be married. By this time I have to have my retirement money set aside. By this time I need to be settling down and ready to retire. And, and I think one of the things that became that I started thinking about was that I don't think that any of those clocks are actually as critical as they are often made out to be, because I think that, like, I started looking at the people that that have careers that I aspire to, people like a Martin Scorsese or a Ridley Scott or a Quentin Tarantino. And these are people that they will, very much in that old school way, they love what they do. And as difficult as it is, and it certainly is difficult, they will work on that until they can't anymore, until they physically can't anymore, and I think that when you are faced with that challenge of like, oh, I haven't done enough, there's still a lot for me to do to get where I need to go. I think it's important to think that if you really, really love that thing that you're talking about, if you really, really love that pursuit, then there isn't a time limit to doing it. You can keep working on it until you literally cannot walk anymore,
Yeah. It's so true. It makes me think. I just think about all the different even programs that have come on, like on Netflix. Was it Grace and Frankie? Frankie and Grace? I always reverse the names. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Like I think about the actors in those in that show, with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin and such, and it's funny because if you, let's say they were a dentist or a nurse or something, accountant, they would probably be retired at that age.
Right.
So it's funny that I don't look at it that way. I'm like, why aren't they acting?
Right.
So I didn't think of it that way, though. That's really smart.
Well, and I think that's when it comes to this kind of a pursuit, because of the fact there's no real end point to it. It's not like you're going to get, even if, let's say hypothetically, like in the acting field, it's not like you're going to get an Oscar and then you're done. This is it. Like you're set for the rest of your life. I mean, there are very, very few people that get to that point where they can stop trying and stop challenging themselves,
Yeah.
And I think with all of these, like you can always be better. You can always be doing different things. You can always expand your creative landscape. And because of that, I think it's important to think of this as literally as a lifelong thing, not as simply, as simply a point A to point B kind of a thing.
Can that do the opposite, you think, though, is if it's a lifelong thing that I don't need to hurry up?
Well, and I think that's, as far as the hurrying up is concerned, I think it's less about the hurry than it is about the accomplishment. I think that at the end of the day, we all have to have metrics for ourselves, metrics by which we measure ourselves and we tell ourselves, like, are we succeeding? Are we doing good things? We have to set bars for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have those, then you can do bad work forever, And I think that's important. I think and an honesty with yourself about whether you're actually reaching those bars is also really important, because certainly maybe there are shifts that need to happen creatively. Maybe you've been an actor for 20 years and it's not quite going the way you want to, but maybe you'd be great as a casting agent,
Yeah.
And I think that kind of honesty and sense of self-evaluation is really important as well.
It's a great way to also look at it that, I'm a big believer that we don't have just one calling, that we can have multiple things and it evolves. And I believe that sometimes that we do things in the past that we needed to do, and that has led us to where we're at today. And that's part of that's why I actually kind of started the show, was because that's kind of been my realization. It's like, I'm on a journey every day. It's not like I started a brand new one yesterday. Like, it's all kind of connected, and it's okay to say, that wasn't working out the way I wanted to. Let me try something new that I might really love.
Right. Well, and I think that evolution is a really, really great point, because I think that's also in the same way where I think that kind of predicting your future can be challenging. I think fixing yourself to one particular goal, I think, can also be equally challenging, because I think you're absolutely right. I think the things that we want and the things that we need are organic.
Yeah.
And if you have that ability to listen to, what's happening and what is working or isn't working for you, I think that ability to listen, I think, is a really important thing and can help you get to where you need to go.
Absolutely. So deep. No, really true. Really true. You mentioned this a couple times and you mentioned a couple of references about, people that you aspire to be, but I'm curious, like, especially because, you're such a creative soul. Currently, what are you loving right now? Like, what's in the creative world and the space, entertainment, whatever it might be, like, what are you loving right now that you're just, maybe either gives you creative juice or you're just loving as a consumer?
Well, actually, one of the things that I've actually been really enjoying lately, actually, is the Ryuichi Sakamoto soundtrack to The Revenant.
Oh, really?
Which I absolutely love. I mean, I loved The Revenant on screen. I think that The Revenant particularly appealed to me because, in one of those Hollywood Reporter conversations, some of the directors at this round table were talking about the idea of what makes you actually get out of your house and go to the cinema, like go into a theater to watch something. And, there's so many movies that nowadays with a 4K high def TV at home,
Yep.
you could really watch it at home and it would be great. But what's going to get you into a theater to watch something? And The Revenant was absolutely that kind of a movie. And last year, actually, we were really lucky because I think The Revenant, I think Mad Max also was just visually just so amazing from a, frantic, energetic
Right.
standpoint. It's seeing that something like that makes me think, oh, I'm so glad I saw that in a theater. And the Ryuichi Sakamoto's soundtrack to The Revenant is so uplifting and rich and sad and heartbreaking in so many different ways that I will often just put that on in my car and listen to it as I'm driving around it. And actually, it makes me want to write, which I think is fantastic also, that sense that it's kind of lit that fire.
That's so interesting you say that when you said the right part, because I'm actually a soundtrack junkie, really. Like some of my favorite things to buy, I love scores of these kind of films. And the thing I have one that I usually go to. It's like my go-to when I need to sit down, I want to write and want to block everything out. And it's actually the Inception soundtrack.
Oh, I love that one.
So do I. So I listen to this Hans Zimmer, soundtrack, and it's actually kind of dark, a lot of it. But
yes.
And the funny thing is the things I write are not dark whatsoever. They're usually like people stories. And so it's fascinating. Do you like with the Reverend, these sorts of things, is that what's like current? Like, does it charge you then into like being more creative? Is it kind of like seeing great stuff that you could aspire to and stuff? Does that kind of give you the little bit more of the fuel to keep going?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, actually, I think every time I walk out of a theater and I see something that just, it has that sense of something that has literally picked you up and moved you to a new mental place. I think every time I see that, and you realize the capability that a good story, and whether it's a great novel or a great graphic novel or a great movie, that ability to transport you somewhere else, it's the closest thing to real magic that I can think of. So every time something like that happens to me, I think to myself, like, why aren't you writing right now?
Any kind of like maybe even one really great piece of advice for somebody who's thinking about kind of jumping into that film or entertainment space to create any kind of, say, if they're just about to jump in or they don't really know how to jump in, any like one piece of advice, do this thing?
The one thing I think I would say, and I think it's particularly touches on my story, but I think that there's a tendency when you're pursuing these kinds of things, these creative pursuits, to take a very lonely approach to it. I think for the longest time when I was trying to write and when I was trying to work on things and I would be sitting there staring at a blank page or working on a shooting something or editing something, where I would feel like I'm stymied, I'm hitting a creative roadblock, and that must mean that I can't do this. That must mean that I am missing the thing that other people have that makes them successful at this. And I think that the one thing for me that really was critical is that nowadays, because of this sense of connection that we have through the web, I've heard the stories of so many other people, from, people like Alfonso Cuarón down the line, people that are hugely successful in these channels, who all face the same challenges all the time, and that realization that the challenges that you face are not unique to you, that they're actually challenges that everyone faces at one time or another. I think that was really important for me, because at that point you realize that not only do they share those challenges, but they also overcame them. So maybe there's a chance that you could too.
Yeah. I love that. Like, reach out, talk to more people, listen to their stories. It's like, you're not alone.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really true.
Absolutely.
I love to have those kind of folks around me. It kind of energizes me as well. And it's funny, I realized the other day, I was thinking, for years, I've always had those thoughts of like, I had a conversation last weekend with a friend that we were talking about going against the grain. And I was describing her, like, I actually thought that was her. I'm like, that's kind of your style. That's just who you are. And I was like, that's kind of actually who I am, I think. I've always felt like the outsider of that. What you realize is, once you find the other people that are going against the grain in the way that you are, you're actually not alone at all. There's all these people that are doing it the same way.
Absolutely. Well, and, I think you bring up a great point too. And I think that's also a great thing for people to remember also, is that it's important who you surround yourself with, because I think that, there will always be people that will tell you that whatever you're trying is too hard, or it's too challenging, or, that maybe you should take the easier way out. But I think it's important to surround yourself with people that are similarly trying to do something, and similarly ambitious, and similarly positive. Because, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by some really amazing friends and people that, not just in filmmaking, but in so many different circles, whether they're, doctors or, or bloggers or visual effects guys, like people that are constantly trying to do more than they, seems normal.
Yeah.
And that ability to overcome challenge, I think, is something that is infectious.
Yep. So great. Totally agree with that. Well, Tony, this has been awesome. I love that you shared all of that. And I think you have some really, really good advice, because it's set in, I think, experience. It's not just, hey, think about these things, but this is what's really worked. If people want to follow along, especially as you, bring more life to Rift and to the Ninth Minute, where online could they follow you at?
Probably the easiest way to follow me is actually to just go to my website, tonytharae.com. I'm going to continue to post content there as I develop it. And it'll be the hub eventually for when these things move forward to the next level. I'll make sure that it's updated with, with updates about the content.
Awesome. And we'll definitely link to that, and maybe even see if we can show just a sneak preview of it on our site on Accidental Information. And that way they'll get you over to you and follow you along. So again,
fantastic.
This has been so good. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we caught up, and I can't wait to see the rest.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me.
Sure. That was Tony Tharae, storyteller, and someone who is balancing his passions with real life. There was a lot to like in that conversation. Definitely how thoughtful Tony was with his answers, for sure. But also there was the one thing that stood out to me was Tony's reference to it's never too late. If you love something that much, just go for it. Don't let common time restraints hold you back. I love that. Also, the advice to really listen to yourself, even if you're not in the middle of your dream job, to know how to evolve next. Smart. Let Tony and I know what you think of the episode. Add a comment on the Accidental Information Facebook page, or tweet us at accidentalinfo using hashtag #LivingYourJourney. You can find out more about Tony, a link to his website, as well as a view of some of his film work, all at accidentalinformation.com. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe. And I'd love it if you gave us a review in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The reviews really do help us bring new episodes and guests each week. Living Your Journey is available every Tuesday. Until next week.